For 2 years, I kept a journal, and when I finally sat down and read the whole thing from the beginning, I realized I had been writing the same story over and over again without seeing it. It took reading my own words back to myself to understand that I had not been in a relationship. I had been in a cycle. I read my journal in one sitting on a Saturday in February. Not because I planned to. I had been looking for something in my desk drawer, a receipt or a charging cable, something mundane, and I found the journal from the past 2 years underneath a stack of other things, and I pulled it out and flipped it open somewhere in the middle and read a few lines. Then I went back to the beginning, and I read the whole thing. It took me 4 hours. I sat on the floor of my bedroom with my back against the bed, and I read every entry in sequence, from the breathless early ones full of his name and what he'd said, and how he'd looked at me, through the confused middle ones where I kept describing the same kinds of scenes in different words, to the later ones that were shorter and more tired, and had a quality of someone writing in a language she had already stopped believing in. When I finished, I sat there for a long time. I did not move. I just sat with the journal in my lap and looked at what I had been living inside for 2 years. Because I had been writing it down the whole time. Every argument, every reconciliation, every time he cried when I tried to leave and I stayed because of the crying. Every time things went back to the way they'd been before. The same scenes, different months. The same words in different arrangements. I had been writing the story. I had just never read it all the way through. His name was Liam, and I want to tell you right now that he was not a bad-looking man on paper. Good job, good apartment, close with his family, remembered your birthday, always picked up when you called. On paper he was, frankly, better than a lot of men I had dated. That was part of the problem. The on-paper version of Liam was genuinely good. I kept offering him the benefit of the doubt because I kept looking at the on-paper version and thinking, this is a man who is trying. We met through mutual friends, the old-fashioned way, at a barbecue in someone's backyard in June. He was standing near the food, which I have always found endearing in a person, and we started talking about something I can't fully remember and talked for the rest of the evening without meaning to. He walked me to my car at the end of the night, and when he asked if he could call me, he said it like it mattered to him whether I said yes. Not like a line, like a real question. I said yes. The first few months were easy in the way that early months can be when someone is paying attention to you and the attention feels good. He was interested in me. He asked questions about my work, my family, my history, and he listened to the answers with real engagement. He remembered things and brought them back up later, which I have always thought was the real indicator, not the asking, but the remembering. He also introduced me quickly to his family, which I took as a good sign. His parents were warm, and his sister, Renata, was funny and sharp and seemed genuinely happy to meet me. His mother made me feel like I had been expected, not in a pressuring way, but in a welcoming way, like there was a space that had been waiting. I remember thinking, these are good people. That means something about him. I kept that thought like evidence for a long time. The first sign came sometime in the first 6 months, and the shape of it was this. He wanted more of me than I knew how to give. That sounds like a complaint about a person who loved too much, and at the time I experienced it that way. He called frequently. He wanted to know where I was and who I was with in a way that was, early on, almost flattering. Like I was someone worth knowing about, worth tracking. My friend Lena noticed before I did. We had been close since our mid-20s, the kind of close where you could go months without speaking and then call from a parking lot at 2 in the afternoon with absolutely anything, and she would just be there. Lena had met Liam exactly once and had come back from that meeting with a look I recognized as her processing something look. She didn't say anything right away. She was careful with me that way. But about 3 months in, she said, over lunch, "Does he ask about your plans a lot?" I said yes. I said it as if it were a good thing. She said, okay. I knew from her okay that she had more to say and had decided not to say it yet. I didn't ask her to. I was not ready to hear it, and some part of me knew I wasn't ready, and I let the moment pass. Looking back, that was the moment I should have asked her to keep talking. The isolation happened so slowly that I genuinely did not experience it as a thing that was happening. That is what I most want to try to communicate, because I know from the outside it looks like something you should be able to notice. You're seeing your friends less. You're spending every weekend with him. You're not going to things you used to go to. How do you not notice? Here is how you don't notice. Because each individual decision to not go somewhere is reasonable. Because you're happy in the early months and you naturally want to spend time with the person you're happy with. Because when you do make plans with friends, he gets quiet in a specific way, not angry, more like wounded, and you feel the pull of that and you think about the thing in his childhood. His father had left when he was young, and he had this threat of fear around being abandoned by people he loved, and you think, he's scared. He needs reassurance. That's not manipulation, that's a person with real fears. I can give him more of my time. And then you give him more of your time, and then a little more. And then the bar of what's acceptable for him shifts slightly, and you adjust to it, and then it shifts again. By the time you look up, you are spending almost all of your time with him, and you have not actively noticed the subtraction of everything else. He did not tell me not to see my friends, he never said that. What he did was make the aftermath of seeing them heavy enough that I started to dread it. Not the seeing them, the coming home to him after, the silence. The slightly withdrawn version of him who would appear for the rest of the evening, hurt in a way he wouldn't name, that I would spend the night trying to manage. He disguised it as devotion. I just miss you so much when you're not here. I know I should be better about this, I'm working on it. I just love you too much, maybe. I just love you too much. I carried that phrase for a long time before I understood it was a leash. I need to talk about the crying. Liam cried easily. Not at movies or at sad news, not in that open, healthy way. In arguments. Specifically in arguments that were approaching a resolution he didn't want. When things were getting toward a real confrontation, toward me saying something clearly or asking for something directly, he would start to cry. The first time it happened, I was thrown. We had been together maybe 4 months, and I had said something about feeling like I couldn't bring certain things up without it becoming a whole evening, and he had gone very still, and then his face had crumbled and he had started to cry. Not quietly. Real crying, shaking slightly, clearly genuinely upset. My instinct was immediate and animal: comfort him, fix it. Whatever I was saying that had made this happen, stop saying it. I stopped saying it. I went to him and held him and said it was okay. I wasn't angry, I wasn't going anywhere. And afterward, I felt like the argument hadn't happened. More than that, I felt like I had done something wrong by raising it. Like the evidence of his pain was evidence of my mistake. He would always apologize later. The next day or the day after, once things had settled, he would find me and say, "I know I got emotional. I know that wasn't fair. I'm sorry for shutting down. I'm sorry for making it about me." And the apology was genuine sounding and detailed, and he would seem genuinely remorseful, genuinely clear-eyed about what had happened. And then, within a few weeks, the same thing would happen again. I kept making excuses for him because the alternative was too hard to face. Because the remorse was so real each time. Because I believed the person who appeared in the apologies was the real Liam, the evolved, self-aware, working on it Liam, and the person who cried during arguments was the damaged one, the scared one, the one who needed patience. I gave the patience endlessly. I got the cycle endlessly in return. I had always been a journal keeper. I started when I was a teenager and it had never fully stopped. There was something about writing that helped me locate myself when I felt lost, made things real that were still too liquid to hold in my head. I wrote often in that relationship, more than I had in years, which I now understand was itself a sign. You write more when you are trying to understand more, when you are trying to make sense of something that keeps not making sense. But I never reread it. That was the thing. I would write and close the book, and the next time I opened it, I would write again, forward, never looking back. So the entries piled up, but the perspective didn't. Each entry was its own small sealed room. I was processing but never accumulating. On that Saturday in February, when I found the journal and sat on the floor and read all of it, that was the first time I had ever read it as a complete document. And reading it that way was like watching a time-lapse of something you missed while it was happening slowly. There it was, the whole shape of it. January, he was wonderful. February, something happened that I can't quite describe, but the atmosphere felt off. March, we had an argument, he cried, I apologized. May, Lena's birthday dinner I almost didn't go to. June, I didn't go to Lena's birthday dinner. August, I noticed I hadn't seen my work friends outside of work in a long time. September, argument, crying, apology, 3 days of careful tenderness. October, argument, crying, apology, 4 days of careful tenderness. November, I wrote something that stopped me cold when I read it 2 years later. It said, I have stopped asking for things I need. I figured out that asking costs more than having. I had written that sentence and closed the book and apparently forgotten I'd written it, but I had known. In November of that first year, I had known. I had just not been willing to follow that knowledge anywhere. His isolation technique had a particular move that I want to name specifically because I think it's one that doesn't get talked about enough. It was not about telling me not to see people. It was about inserting himself into every relationship I had until the relationship existed through him. My work friendships, for example. I worked in healthcare administration at a mid-size hospital, and I had a small group of colleagues who I genuinely liked. We sometimes got dinner or drinks, normal work friend stuff. Liam started asking a lot of questions about these people. Not invasive questions, curious ones, interested ones, and I would answer because it seemed fine to answer. But over time, the questions accumulated into opinions. He had thoughts about my colleague Jamie, who he had never met, based on things I had reported about her. He found her competitive. He found my other colleague Marcus flirtatious toward me, again based entirely on things I had mentioned. He had concerns, thoughtful, caring concerns. And those concerns had a weight to them that I felt whenever I made plans with those people. So I started mentioning those plans less, and then making them less, and then not at all. My boss, a woman named Vera, was the one person in that environment who I never fully lost. Vera was in her 50s and had the particular quality of someone who had been through enough to see clearly without being unkind about it. She managed our floor and she was good at it, and she paid attention to her people. About a year into the relationship, she called me into her office one afternoon, ostensibly about a scheduling thing, and after we dealt with the scheduling thing she said, "How are you doing?" Not as a pleasantry, as an actual question. She looked at me in a way that meant she was actually asking. I said fine, obviously. I was practicing fine. She said, "You seem a little less here than you used to be. I don't know if that means anything." She left a pause. I said work was good, I was just tired. She said, "Okay, I want you to know something. Your position is solid. You are valued here and whatever you need to make this work for you is available. I just want you to know that." I didn't understand all of what she was telling me at the time. I thought she was doing a general wellness check. But I held on to it in some part of me that was still paying attention, that hadn't been fully submerged yet. She was telling me I was still here. That something outside the relationship was holding a place for me. That mattered more than I knew. The 3 times I tried to leave. The first time was about 16 months in. I had had a conversation with Lena, one of the rare times I had actually seen her, and she had finally said the things she had been holding back since month 3. She said she felt like she was losing me. She said she had watched the last year and she was worried. She said, "Nadia, from the outside it looks like you're disappearing." I went home and I thought about what she'd said and I thought, she's right. I can feel it too. I went home and I said to Liam that I thought we needed to take a break, that I needed space to figure out what I wanted. He cried immediately. I mean within 30 seconds. His face collapsed and he said, "I knew this would happen. I've been waiting for you to leave." He said, "I know I'm not enough. I know I'm too much to deal with. I thought I was getting better." I stayed. I told myself I was staying because I loved him and I did. I told myself I was staying because this was a real person in real pain and you don't abandon someone in real pain. But I was also staying because leaving, in that moment, felt like an act of cruelty that I was not capable of committing. His grief was so immediate and so visible and so hard to argue with. And so I didn't argue with it. I backed down. The second time was maybe 6 months later. A quieter attempt. I didn't even say the word break. I just said I was feeling suffocated and I needed more time to myself and more time with my friends, and could we talk about that? He cried, not as immediately as before, but he got there. He said he was working on it, he knew he had attachment stuff, he had actually been looking into therapy. He was so sincere about the therapy. He found a therapist within the week. He went for about a month and then stopped going, for reasons that were always reasonable when he explained them. I stayed. The third time, I don't even know if it counts as a try. I said, at the end of a bad argument, I can't keep doing this. He looked at me for a moment. Then something crossed his face that was different from the crying, something more calculating. He said, very quietly, "Where would you even go?" I didn't answer, but the question landed in me somewhere and sat there. It was such a small, controlled cruelty. Not screaming, not threatening. Just 4 words designed to remind me how small my world had gotten while he was supposedly just loving me too much. I stayed that time too, but something had shifted. I had heard those 4 words, and something underneath me had made a note. The journal on the floor in February. After I finished reading it, I sat there, and I did not cry. I had expected to cry. Instead, I felt something clarifying, like watching sediment settle to the bottom of a glass of water. Everything going still and separating into what it actually was. The entries didn't lie. They couldn't. I had written them in real time, in the moment, without the future self's interpretation. What they showed was the same pattern cycling through every season of the last 2 years. And what they showed, most clearly, was the sentence from November. I have stopped asking for things I need. I figured out that asking costs more than having. I had learned not to ask. I had learned it so well that I had stopped noticing what I wasn't asking for anymore. I had shrunk my needs down to what he could tolerate, and I had done it so gradually that it had started to feel like my needs had just gotten smaller. Like I just wanted less. I didn't want less. I had just learned the cost of wanting more. I opened my phone and I called Lena. She answered because Lena always answered. I said, I need to leave him. I need help knowing how to do it without staying when he cries. She said, I've been ready for this call for a year and a half. Tell me what you need. I said I needed a lawyer's name first. I needed to know my rights before I said anything to him. We lived together, not married, but my name was on the lease and there were shared things, and I had stopped fully understanding my own financial situation because managing that had also become a thing I'd gradually stopped doing. Lena had a name within 2 days, a family lawyer who handled separation cases. She emailed me the contact information with a message that just said, "You can do this." The lawyer's name was Andrea. She had an office on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and I almost canceled my appointment 3 times before I finally walked in. The first almost cancel was 2 days before, when Liam had a good day and was the gentle, attentive version of himself, and I sat with the appointment on my calendar and thought, am I making a mistake? Is this who he actually is, and the hard parts are just the hard parts that every relationship has? The second almost cancel was the morning of, when I woke up and felt the weight of what I was about to do and thought, once I walk into that office, this becomes real. And real meant consequences. Real meant his face when I told him. Real meant his family, who I loved. The third was in the parking structure outside the building, 10 minutes before the appointment, when I sat in my car and replayed the 3rd time I had tried to leave. Where would you even go? I thought about that question, and then I thought, everywhere, anywhere, here, I'm here, I got myself here. I walked in. Andrea was direct and thorough and did not waste time. She asked me the practical questions first, the lease, the shared finances, how long we'd been living together, whether there were assets we'd accumulated together. Then she asked a more open question, what was the situation like day to day? I told her, a condensed version but an honest one. She said, I want to make sure you have a support plan in place when you tell him. Sometimes when people leave relationships like the one you're describing, the partner's response can escalate. Not always, but you should be prepared. I said, he cries, that's mostly what he does. She said, okay, that can be its own kind of pressure. Do you have somewhere you can be that evening that isn't your apartment? I did, Lena had already offered. The leaving was the 4th time I told him, and it was different from the others because I had done the work ahead of it. Not just the lawyer.